This was supposed to be it, the meeting that could have changed everything. For the first time in over a decade, the US and Iran, face to face. But instead of a breakthrough, we got a total breakdown. So the big question is, what went so wrong? And maybe more importantly, what does this failure mean for an already shaky Middle East? All right, let's dive in.
And right out of the gate, the US made it crystal clear. Yeah, this failed. The vice president's words here, they were a total gut punch for anyone who was hoping for some kind of peaceful outcome. This wasn't just a simple setback. No. This felt like a sign of something much, much deeper, something way more dangerous simmering just below the surface.
And look, you gotta understand, this wasn't just any old meeting. We're talking about a once-in-a-generation shot. The first time these two sides talked directly, at this level, since the Islamic Revolution. The stakes, they were just sky high. And that's what makes this whole thing, this complete deadlock, so devastating.
Okay, so what was the final straw? What really killed the deal? To figure that out, we've got to go inside that negotiating room. And what you find, it's a story that's not really about politics. At its heart, it's about two sides that just fundamentally do not trust each other. At all. So you have the Americans walking in, and they've got this swagger, right? President Trump was super confident, maybe even a little cocky. He seemed to think, hey, we've got all the cards. Iran's going to have to fold eventually. The American thinking was pretty straightforward. We've got the power here. You guys don't really have a choice. But, was that a massive miscalculation?
Because, yeah, Iran saw it completely differently. For them, this wasn't about who had more power. It was about respect. They weren't just going to get pushed around and bullied into some deal. So they just flipped the whole thing on its head, basically saying, you want to deal with us? Fine. But first, you have to earn our trust. And right there, that was the fundamental clash that just blew the whole negotiation wide open.
But it wasn't just this big picture trust issue. Nope. There were some really specific, concrete things on the table that were total non-starters for both sides. These were the red lines, the things that were absolutely non-negotiable. And they're what ultimately caused the breakdown. And this right here. This is the absolute heart of the conflict. The U.S. came in demanding a total shutdown of Iran's nuclear program, an end to all uranium enrichment. And that's the key process, right? The one that can create fuel for power plants, but also the core material for a nuclear bomb. Iran's response? A simple, flat no. On the single biggest issue, there was zero middle ground. Absolutely none. And the U.S. vice president basically spelled it out. He said, look, we've been very clear about our red lines. This is a take it or leave it kind of deal. The Americans weren't there to negotiate a compromise. They were there to dictate the terms. You could almost say the talks were dead on arrival.
So what happens when the talking stops? Well, that tension, it doesn't just fizzle out. No, it exploded. It spilled right out of that negotiating room and into one of the most volatile, most strategically important places on the entire planet.
We're talking about the Strait of Hormuz. It's this tiny, narrow choke point for a massive chunk of the world's oil supply. So much oil passes through there every single day. And it's exactly where these U.S.-Iran tensions were about to boil over into a very, very real crisis. And boom, just like that, the threats start flying. Iran's Revolutionary Guards, they're their elite force. They basically put the whole world on notice. They said any military ship that gets too close is going to be met with force. The time for posturing was over. This was getting really serious, really fast. And President Trump's response? Wow. It was even more explosive. He jumped on social media and threatened to, and these are his words, blow to hell any Iranian ship that crossed the line. This is not the language of diplomacy anymore. This is the language of war.
And you know what? These threats had an immediate and honestly a chilling effect. Over that weekend, right after the talks collapsed, trackers recorded only 18 ships moving through the Gulf. Just 18.
Now, to give you some perspective on how crazy that is, just 1 week before, on a single day, there were 172 transits. So we went from 172 a day to 18 over a whole weekend. The threat of conflict basically brought one of the world's most critical shipping lanes to a grinding halt. You can just imagine the shockwaves that sent through the global economy. So, what happens now? Where do things go from here? Diplomacy is in shreds. Both sides have their militaries on high alert. The future is a total unknown. It is an incredibly tense, uncertain moment.
And this is really the question on everyone's mind, right? The one that's probably keeping world leaders awake at night. After all this, After the public threats, the failed talks, is a peaceful solution even possible anymore? Or are we just watching the world slowly drift toward another devastating war in the Middle East?
But maybe, just maybe, there's a tiny sliver of hope. Russia's President Putin seems to think a deal is still on the table, but only if the U.S. totally changes its approach. Is he right? Or is that just wishful thinking from someone watching on the sidelines? Honestly, only time is going to tell. But one thing's for sure, the entire world is holding its breath to see what happens next. And so are we.